Hey, welcome everybody. This is Simon Rosenberg from Hopium Chronicles and just, Democratic Party world. Welcoming my good friend David Pepper today for a conversation. I'm really looking forward to this one. I mean, David and I have been operating in very parallel tracks. We actually haven't spoken in a long time, but I feel him every day in my work. His stuff shows up in my Twitter feed, and many of you talk about the book that he just published and the talks that he gives. I mean, he's become an important part of our, this new family that we have in the Democratic Party, who's trying to make sure that our freedom and democracy don't slip away from us. And so David is a former state party chair in Ohio. He's written a book called Saving Democracy, which we'll talk about in a minute. He's got a Substack, so he's a fellow Substacker now. But the main reason I really wanted him to come today was to give us an update on the really important two elections that are happening in Ohio, the August 8th special election and then the November ballot initiative. There are tens of thousands of people across the country involved in these critical elections, and these abortion ballot initiatives have become a really important part of the political landscape, and something we as Democrats need to continue to learn from, I think, to sort of experiment, learn from, to see what we can do. Because what we're seeing is that where we put abortion on the ballot, the Republican coalition splinters. And, this has become a very powerful tool for us. And so, David, welcome. And thank you so much for being here. This is going to be a fun event. And we're going to talk for a little while. We'll get to questions, around 1:30 or so today. And so just hang tight. But David, give us a sense of where you think things are on the ground now. I mean, the polling looks encouraging. We've had early vote now for a few weeks. What's your sense of where things are in Ohio?
I think they're pretty good. As you said, this is a real battle. Republicans saw what happened in Kansas. They know straight up referenda on abortion, and almost every state is a loser for them, especially when you're talking about laws like Ohio's that are bans without exceptions. I mean, that's something that 10% or fewer of Ohioans support. And about 60% of Ohio is pro-choice. And we see that pretty consistently going back years. So this is really kind of an end run of a desperate group trying to stop this November ballot initiative that just the other day got certified to be on the ballot to protect reproductive freedom. And it looks like this thing is about as underwater as a straight up vote on abortion. The issue one, this effort to amend the Constitution to raise the threshold to 60%. When it first started, it was around 50-50. And I worried, well, people aren't connecting it to the abortion ballot initiative in November. They clearly are doing that. And so now it looks to be underwater. But there's some really interesting cross currents, as you suggested. I mean, a plurality of Republicans oppose issue one. There's something about it that it's offending their sense of democracy. A bigger chunk of voters that are saying that they will vote against the reproductive freedom amendment in November, I can't remember the exact number, but a much bigger chunk of that says they're going to vote no on issue one than people would have expected. The big champion of this thing is this horrific Secretary of State in Ohio named Frank LaRose. A plurality of his voters oppose issue one. In independents, it's off the charts. So you're seeing, and this also is reflected in John Kasich being against it, Bob Taft being against it, other well-known Republicans. So you are seeing a pretty robust coalition across party lines. The Libertarian Party's against it. So the polling is good. The early vote looks pretty good. We have to have a lead with early vote in Ohio. If you don't, you're done. But it looks like we have a lead. We're seeing turnout that's far greater than they wanted and that you would normally expect in an August special election. But obviously, in the end, all that's nice, but it's going to come down to who shows up on election day in a very low turnout race. And as I did a whiteboard yesterday, Republicans are always underwater in the polls. Almost every one of their core issues is unpopular. That's literally what shapes, and I write about this in my new book, what shapes their entire political battle is their understanding that their issues are unpopular. So it's not like them being down in the polls is some breaking news development. That's the life and that's the battle they're in. And so the worry is, and if you're like you and me, you're always worried I know we're optimistic, but you're also better not take anything for granted. Right. The worry is that they overcome bad polling through a low turnout race where no one's paying attention, which puts on us, and when they run scare tactic ads to spike their turnout, which we know they always do and are now, So the key for all of us, including anyone on this call who wants to help, is we've got to keep getting our early vote in. And on August 8th, we got to make sure we're getting a turnout. We'll lose on election day. The election day vote will be a more conservative electorate, but we've got to keep pushing all the way to election day to make sure enough people are voting that the polling that reflects where Ohioans are is reflected in who actually votes. And their gambit here of running an election that's literally on a day that's illegal in Ohio was to sort of artificially overcome their minority status on a day that no one's paying attention. So it's good, it feels good, but it's a long way from actually the vote count. And that's the stress point that we all have to kind of let motivate us to go run through the tape through August 8th.
How can people help? I mean, there are many people watching today have probably already made phone calls or texted or written postcards and given some money. You know, how we're almost, 10, 12 days out, right? How can people help now? What's your recommendation for the best way?
The most helpful thing, and I'm sure there's some postcards on here. There's still a few days left of sending postcards, although that clock is ticking, and you're more expert than I am on the postcards on here. I'm going to look up a real quick post I did a couple days ago on how people can help. Because one thing, and you know this, and I think everyone on this call knows this, help us because it's Ohio, and Ohio is important. Every state's important. But in this case, help because this is one of the national tactics that they will use wherever they can to avoid having a majority, hold its own state house accountable. So helping Ohio is obviously critical for Ohio's sake, but helping Ohio, this is the same as the Wisconsin Supreme Court race. That was a national race. The Kansas referendum was a national race. This is a national race. So I'm going to put up where if you're done, hold on, let me make sure I know where to do this. Once you're done with postcards, or if you don't do postcards, where's the chat room here? I'm going to put up a link.
Yeah, I put it in the Q&A, I think, and I can also, when I send out this video, David, I'll link to all this stuff. So
yeah, what I would say is, well, I'm not finding what I'm saying is there are the last couple weeks, your help could really matter. This is a small number of voters. I just did a video 10 minutes before we started this. Here's an example of how you can help. There are 65,000 absentee ballots that our modeling shows us are likely no on issue 1 voters that are sitting at home somewhere. 65,000 is a stadium full of people that is the margin of victory potentially in a low turnout election. So we need to get to those voters. If you do text messages or phone calls, you may be calling them. And we just launched, this is why I did this video, a digital media effort where our technology allows us to really hit these folks with a message saying, hey, don't forget to send your ballot in. Those are some of the ways you can help. So it's dollars, of course, and it's also just activism. And I can't find where I can share this on.
Yeah, I don't, somehow I may not have created a chat.
Let's
today,
include it in the thing afterwards.
Yeah.
You know what? I'll even read the thing. It's very simple. It's because I just was looking at it. It's the Mobilize app, mobilize.us/OHDEMS. Again, mobilize.us/OHDEMS. You go there, you'll be tied into any number of text, phone bank, other opportunities, and all of that helps. This low turnout is the part that should scare us all. They put it in an August election to mess with the majority. And if they win, they have messed with the majority forever, because it means their 41% can always outvote our 59%. Basically, issue 1 would be a statewide gerrymander on statewide issues. And so if they can use this low turnout election to sort of eke out a false majority, they can beat us long term. And so every phone call, every postcard, and I've been so inspired by the national effort here. During my book launch, I was in Boston and New York. And I did these events in Boston, New York. And at each event, people had already been sending postcards. They'd already been phone banking, and just keep doing that through the end. And it would make a huge difference for us.
I want to make sure everyone realizes that what happens now, if you haven't done phone calls or texting into the state, is that you're only calling Democrats, right? These are not hard calls. I mean, some people get a little hesitant because They don't want to call somebody who may hang up on them or are hostile. And so they're a little bit hesitant about calling people. Here, you're just calling Democrats and asking them to go vote on something that they almost assuredly will already support or be vote no on. And so these are easy calls to make. And I think the key thing here is what I want to ask everybody who's watching today is I'd like to ask everyone to do at least one shift of calls, between now and let's say midweek next week. I mean, this weekend would be great. I mean, to make these calls or during the evenings. I think it's Tuesday, Thursday are the main call nights in this program. I'm going to try to do at least 3 shifts myself, between now and election day of 2 to 3 hours. I love making phone calls, actually. I enjoy talking to Democrats. Oftentimes people who pick up are open. If they've answered the phone, they're open to hearing from you, right? I mean, it's an interesting thing. I mean, you get a lot of hangups or, not hangups, you get a lot of, voicemail, right? But for the people who pick up, they're often very receptive to hearing from you, and they're very grateful that you've reached out. And so, I really do believe that one of the reasons, David, that we, you and I have been in this for a long time, this new grassroots that we have around the country, where now tens of thousands of people can be the cavalry to come help Ohio from all over the country. It's a powerful new muscle that we have as Democrats. And it's one of the reasons we're seeing such high performance and why we saw such high performance in 2022 in the battleground states, and why we saw in Wisconsin and in Jacksonville, Florida, and in Colorado Springs and in the Pennsylvania special, is because we've now got this band of hungry patriots all around the country who are getting ready to move on from, Ohio. They went from Wisconsin and to Jacksonville, and now they're coming here. We've got the Virginia state, in the fall. We've got the ballot initiative itself in Ohio, and I would like you to talk about that. But we also have Virginia, the legislative races there are going to be really critical. I know many people are already working on that. And then also, I'm really pushing people to get involved in the Florida ballot initiative that's similar to what Ohio's doing. But can you talk a little bit about the November ballot initiative and your sense about where, assuming that we win on August 8th, what happens next?
Yeah, well, one, I want to just echo what you said, and you were such a inspiring figure last fall amid the doom and gloom that I have some pretty dark things I cover, but one of the points in my second book was I'm optimistic too. I literally rushed my second book out because I see such a big opportunity with their extremism finally revealed, that if the army of pro-democracy folks that you've been rallying and I've been trying to rally, if we see the battle for what it is and fight it the right way, I think we not only have a winning streak already happening, last August, Kansas, last November, not just federal, but Secretary of State races where we crushed election deniers in every swing state, picking up the Pennsylvania State House, the Michigan State House, then April in Wisconsin. Now here in Ohio, I think we have a chance to do the same thing. Basically, when those who care about democracy sense a threat to it anywhere, they are rallying in huge ways way beyond our traditional swing states, like Kansas. And so the point of this second book was to say, my God, like when we get our act together, we go out and win, don't we? And the battlefield is broader than it's typically been when that group gets inspired. And so that's why I'm optimistic as you. And I put at the end in this book, I'm almost this nerdy guy saying, here's what we can do. You'll love this. I put together at the end of the book a suggested democracy timeline. An issue one hadn't percolated left, but it's go from April to August in Ohio, roll into Virginia in November, run in every district if you can. They didn't quite get there, but they're running a lot of districts.
Almost everyone, by the way.
Almost everyone. So go for it. We should definitely win Virginia back. Win reproductive freedom in Ohio in November. Let's talk about the Florida one. I'm not as in tune on that. Make sure we reelect Andy Beshear in Kentucky. The most popular Democratic governor in America is the Democratic governor of Kentucky. You know why? Because he's just a great public servant, and we need to get him reelected. And then recruit for every state house for next year. No extremist should go without accountability and without an opponent, and then roll in 24. So I'm very optimistic that we are building a winning streak for democracy. Much of those wins are hidden because of the national frame that's only about a few federal elections, but it's building. And so to your question, let's crush this thing in August. Let's blow the doors off it. Let's recruit to run against every single Republican who offended this state and this country by trying to change the rules of direct democracy middle of a pro-choice direct democracy effort. I mean, literally, issue one is almost the perfect epitome of the right wing's approach to politics. They know their view is unpopular. They know their view on abortion is unpopular. And the only way they can keep an unpopular view as policy is by rigging democracy. They do that through gerrymandering and suppressing the vote everywhere. But in Ohio, when they saw a specific one coming, they knew where they would win. They are taking a 100-year process that no one's complained about for a century, that was inspired by reformists in the 1910s to take on corrupt legislatures. And they're trying to change it so that their unpopular view, if it only hits 41%, is a winner come November. This is literally, it's a perfect symbol of why they attack democracy. They know their viewpoint is a minority worldview. They know it will lose in the fair democracy, so they rig democracy enough so it wins even though it's unpopular. So let's crush it in August. And now that it's been exposed more clear than I can even write in my books what their political battle is, again, roll into November, win it here. By the way, recruit everywhere. I don't care if you're in Oklahoma or Tennessee, where 50% of those Republican legislators who voted out the two justices were unopposed last November, or New York State. Run everywhere. Recruit now to run everywhere. These extremists are doing what they're doing, not just because of gerrymandering, which is already a terrible problem we have to solve, but also because half of them don't even face an opponent. So of course they're going to keep banning abortion, no exception. So in addition to focusing on Virginia and Florida and Ohio in November, make sure wherever you live in this country, and I see Mary from Indiana's on here, and I know they're working on this, we're working with them, make sure you are recruiting to run everywhere this fall so that come next March or April, when the primaries are happening, we are full on the field. Simon, one of my big fears is, I think the Biden-Trump matchup in the end is a good matchup for us. Yep. But in 20, we kind of focused only on that matchup. So a whole lot of people voted for Biden, and then Republicans the rest of the way down the ticket. If we have a Biden-Trump matchup, given the extremism of Congress, represented by Marjorie Taylor Greene, given the extremism we're going to see of DeSantis and Trump in that primary, and given the extremism we now see post-Dobbs in all these state houses, the contrast of all the good things you are good to share that we are doing versus the extremism other side, we've got to run it all the way through the ballot. So when Joe Biden wins Arizona, we're winning a Senate seat and we're winning the state house of Arizona, because we've made clear, it's not just Trump and Biden. The contrast and the extremism runs all the way through those state house districts. So I think there's huge opportunity in the near term. And if we recruit well, and we value people running everywhere, which we must do, I think 24 can be the year where we take advantage of a horrible contrast for the Republicans, where they're the extremists, and we run that advantage all the way through. And we do it in states far beyond the swing states we traditionally focus on.
So David, we're in deep agreement on this. I've written a memo called Get to 55, where I am challenging the Democratic Party to try to imagine what it would be like to get to 55% in 2024 nationally. I think it's there for us. I think that we're already claiming real estate in Colorado Springs and Jacksonville in the Wisconsin Supreme Court race. We're claiming real estate that's available to us because of their extremism. And it would be shame on us if we don't sort of have a man on the moon kind of mentality here, the way you're describing. And I've got a memo for any of you who haven't read it. It's called Get to 55. It's on my Substack. And just one other point about Florida, because it isn't as well known as others. This is an effort to get a ballot initiative on the ballot in 2024. This year, they're getting the signatures. Florida has a very difficult process of getting ballot initiatives on the ballot. They're in the process of getting the signatures now. The polling is very similar to Ohio, right? It splinters the Republican coalition. There are already Republicans working in a bipartisan way. And this in particular would roll back the 6-week abortion ban that DeSantis just passed. That's now law in Florida. Enormous opportunity as part of our comeback in Florida, which began with the election of Donna Deegan in May, which our community was very, very involved in. That we are on a positive track now in Florida. We got to keep going. DeSantis, I think the radicalization of his legislative session and the mess that he's making of the state is going to give us an opportunity to reclaim some lost ground there in the next year. And I think this ballot initiative actually could become sort of the focal point of the frustration and anger with how far right the Republicans have gone, you know, in what was up until very recently the most important swing state in the country, right? And so, you know, Ohio was up until recently one of the most, you know, the most important swing states. So we can't let Florida, you know, drift away that like Ohio did. And it's one of the reasons why these initiatives are so important. These are big, important states in the United States. And we need to do everything we can to put them back into play and to make them part of our, you know, modern map. And so I'm with you 100% on that. And David, can you tell everybody about your Substack and your book? I mean, for people who want to stay connected to you, who don't know much about you, how do they learn more about these big arguments you're making and stay connected to you in the coming days?
Well, my good friend Mary Nolan from Indiana is here, and I keep texting her links since I can't do it. So I'll give her a link. She put up the link to this effort we're trying to do to put dollars into making sure we're reaching out to those 65,000 unreturned ballots. So she did that. I'll send her a link to my Substack, but I don't do it every day like I think you do, but every couple of days I will put out there a Substack, normally with one of my whiteboard videos that explains one of the many concepts, why we have to run everywhere, the damage that happens when we don't, case studies of good things that are happening, kind of key tips from my book. So I'll send, I think you can find me just on David Pepper, but I'll send that to Mary also to post. And like you, it's a great way to keep a conversation going. And my whole point of my books is to have an ongoing conversation. I literally created a website. If you go to the website, savedemocracy.us, you'll see that website is a whole lot of the book broken down into different pages, including, you'll like this, one of my big obsessions in the book, for those of you who read it, you'll know this, is I think everyone needs to use their entire footprint in life to lift democracy. We only use a sliver of our footprint. You know, we give a little bit, we maybe volunteer late in elections. Obviously, you and people on this call do a lot more, but a lot of people think that the only political involvement is a little sliver. In my view, is once you realize the battle for democracy, the front line is literally every corner of every state, because their front line is attacking democracy through states and state houses. That's where they're beating us. Even when we win federal elections, if they lock down a gerrymandered state house, that's where they attack abortion. That's why they attack democracy. That's why they don't want citizens going to the ballot, by the way, because that's a threat to where their front line is. Once you see that that's their front line, although sobering, my hope is that it's empowering, because it means wherever you live in this country, be it Oklahoma, Indiana, Ohio, there is something you could be doing right now to lift democracy. If you go to my website, savedemocracy.us, you'll see that I provide a lot of those tips and worksheets on that website. And I do the same thing through my Substack. So I'm going to send that to Mary. Mary, I appreciate you helping me here. I'm going to send that link to Mary so she can put it up. And so for those of you who want to go all in, and I hope you do, because I think the narrative of the book helps bring some life to this, that you get lost in shorter segments or tweets or even whiteboards, is my first book was Laboratories of Autocracy. Someone asked me on the chat I saw, what's been the difference in the reaction? The Laboratories of Autocracy I wrote in March of 21, basically saying, guys, like, I know we're excited Biden won, but that's not the whole battle. Their whole battle is that they are attacking mainly through rigged state houses. And I go through this sort of painful case study of what happened to Ohio. You just said we fell away. We are a case study of not a state, all of a sudden, the people of that state becoming magically really conservative. There's maybe been a little bit of that in the Trump era. We're a case study of how a rigged and gerrymandered state house can completely screw up your state overnight and take a state that was moderate and ram down the voting laws so that it suppresses folks and gerrymander the hell of the state so the extremism is protected. And all of a sudden, a state that's still kind of moderate, I think Sherrod will win Ohio, it's still kind of moderate, is acting like a crazy right-wing state. So that book was sort of a wake-up call with some tips. But to get to your question and to get to the person on the chat's question, as you would expect, Simon, from what you do, a lot of the feedback was, David, that was such an eye-opening book, but my God, it was so dark. I felt like I had to skip to the end to know what to do, because the book at the end does go through that. The second book is essentially a user's manual Once you have seen the light that this is a deeper battle that's anchored in states than we haven't really realized, the lessons of what we can do they're huge, and there's so many more things. So the second book, Saving Democracy, is basically a user's manual of how we can all fight for democracy in the right way. And as I said to Simon as we started, he's all over this book, folks, because when it comes to messaging and communication, in his vision that although it's terrible we have a Fox News, it's terrible we have all these right-wing echo chambers, our war room can be enormous if we all see that we are in it, versus, as Simon described in one podcast, the old war room of the Clinton era, where it was 10 really smart guys drinking a lot of coffee, trying to figure out how to win the messaging battle that day. We now have millions of people in the war room. One part of your footprint that I walk through in the book, in life, in your world, is that part of all of our footprint is we can communicate in ways that we couldn't have 20 years ago. And so one of the key chapters in the book is use your full footprint, including communications, to fight the democracy battle. But the book also goes through many ways, whether it's making sure we're running everywhere, valuing running everywhere, re-engaging the parts of the electorate that have been intentionally purged by the other side, taking on censorship. The second book is sort of a how-to of how we can all go through, how we can all see that we have a bigger role to play in this battle of democracy than we've ever really believed before. So that's that. I know that's a long answer, but that's
No,
really
no,
what
it's
the second book
great.
tries to do.
It's so, I love your passion and the depth of your understanding and knowledge. I learn from you every time, David. And let me throw out before we get to questions, and I want to thank everybody in the Q&A for spreading information about how to get more involved. It will also be in the, when I post this video, we'll have lots of links for how people can get involved. I want to throw out an idea to you that I've been kicking around, when I spoke to the Network Nova event on Saturday, was sort of the first time I really talked about it in public, which is this concept of voting on day one. And the whole idea behind this is that, as you know, David, because I talked to Carville about this in this new podcast I did with Carville, when we did GOTV, we did, our prime voters in the morning, and we did low propensity voters in the afternoon on election day, right? Now with early vote, we've been given a set of tools that we've never had before as Democrats. I mean, there are more Democrats in the country than there are Republicans, but we have more episodic voters and erratic voters than the Republicans do. And so turnout is really a big deal for us. And now, because of the early vote, because of the enormity of the campaigns that we have, because of all the money that all of you are raising for our campaigns, we're out raising the Republicans in these races 4 to 5 to 1 now in the federal races, because of the remote texting and phone technology, which allows you to export your labor and not just your money into the battlegrounds. We are pushing the early vote and our performance in the early vote to the upper end of what's possible. We did better in the early vote in 2022 than we did in 2018 and 2020, which is a sign of our maturation in terms of learning how to use these new muscles we have, this new strategy. But I want to put out there an idea that I'd love you to kick around and think about and do one of your whiteboards around, which is this idea that if you're a loyal Democrat, you need to vote on day one of early vote, and whether it's by mail or in person. And the reason why is if you vote on day one, you take yourself off the GOTV rolls right away, and the campaigns get that stuff every night, and then they move on the next day to lower propensity voters. If we can get 1 million people, 2 million people, 3 million people, if we can get 5% of our electorate to vote in the first 24 hours, it means the campaigns are starting to move into secondary and tertiary GOTV targets on day, 13 days out, 12 days out, 11 days out, and not at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And this system, what I call a virtuous cycle of participation that we have in the Democratic Party, is something that I think we have to educate activists all around the country and create something that I call, the vote on day one campaign, right? Which is that as a Democrat, you're going to commit to give money, all the things, use all your parts to get in democracy, but I'm also going to vote on day one. And if that happens, let me just make sure everyone understands what happens when we do that. When we do that, then we increase the number of Democrats who vote. You increase turnout because you're allowing these massive, unprecedentedly large campaigns that we've never had before to go reach voters that we could never communicate to before. And guess what? When we touch them, they vote. And so this is a powerful, And one of the things, if you listen to Republicans talk about what happened in 2022, what they talk about more than anything else is reclaiming that they got beat badly in the early vote. They're obsessed now with reestablishing their what used to be their dominance in the early vote, right? They were the early vote party, we were the election day party. That's been completely flipped. And you're already seeing it in Virginia, you're seeing the RNCs launch the campaign. So I'd love you to kick around this idea of us doing together, David, starting to educate the family about the need to vote on day one as a concept, one of your whiteboards, right? It would be a great whiteboard concept, but what are your thoughts about that?
I couldn't agree more. And one of the things I get into in this book on communication is so much of our language sort of frames things the wrong way. I mean, we shouldn't even call it early vote because that makes it sound like you're doing it before the election day, right?
Right.
Like you said, day one's better. And one of the things that we all slip into it early on in this early vote window. Like, again, I'm saying it now. We were all saying vote no August 8th. And that's the wrong message. It's vote no through August 8th. You have a month to vote no. So I completely agree. And why are they cracking down on early vote in Ohio? Because Obama crushed them in early vote. And he was the first one in that campaign. Was the first, it was this is the irony of it all. It was Republicans who actually pushed. They were so embarrassed by the 2004 election in Ohio. They're the ones who opened up the window and made it no fault in Ohio. But Obama's the one who said, okay, I know you guys think that this is generally a Republican electorate voting early. We're going to change that. And that was their approach. And the entire, and I've tried to explain this both in my fiction and nonfiction, the real purpose of early vote, if you're strategic, is that's when you get the people least likely to vote on election day for all sorts of reasons. They've got busy and complicated lives, so it's harder to show up on one day. Make it day one for everybody. But like you said, the more you vote early, the more are off the list, the less you have to call, and you can really drill down on getting to the people who you think are going to vote for you, but may not, for all sorts of reasons, show up on election day. So absolutely. We need to frame it differently. We have to coordinate around differently. The successful campaigns in Ohio have actually done that well, and Obama is the best example. But it's one of the many things, just like we have to stop saying off-year elections. I think saying that early vote day is day one is really smart. For the
Tom Bonnier, my dear friend, said, we should talk about the first day of voting, and then election day is the last day of voting, right? Exactly. And I will say one other thing about this issue about the early vote. There's a lot of sociological research around peer pressure, and this, and anyone who's read this stuff. To me, the most powerful peer pressure that we can exert now, meaning that people say, hey, my neighbors are voting, I need to vote too, is in these stories of the power of the early vote. I think that when we have a massive early vote, we're putting peer pressure on the entire early vote window to get people to go vote because they're seeing their peers do it. And, Tom and I talked a lot about this because, Target Smart had an unprecedented tool this last election. Part of the reason I was able to see so well into the election in 2022 was that Target Smart, the amazing company that Tom Bonnier runs, produced as a public service. They twice a day, they updated in every state the early vote, everyone who had voted. So we had an unprecedented window into what was happening with the early vote. And they would update it, and I would call Tom every morning, and because it was so positive that I would call him every morning and say, I just want to make sure this data is correct, right? You guys haven't made any mistakes. And because, you didn't put the wrong stuff in, because I can't really believe it's so positive, because this was supposed to be a terrible election for us. And then what happened in the early vote, just so everyone understands this is really important for all the activists and people who work in campaigns here. So our expectation was, when we were watching the early vote in 2022, is that we would have the surge in the beginning, and then it would sort of level out and the Republicans would sort of catch up. That never happened. And it didn't happen, we kept every day, it was slow and steady across the whole country. We saw, by the way, weakness in New York and California, which we communicated up to the national party. We could see that there were going to be problems there, but everywhere else, things are going really well. And then in the final week, every single day in the final week, it got better and better and better for us. And what that was the campaigns kicking in, right? That was these massive machines and all of you, the phoning and the texting and everything all of you did, the canvassing, the postcarding, we could see the Democratic Party new muscles engage and push the early vote up every day. We thought it was going to get worse in the final week and the Republicans would start voting in larger numbers. We thought they would catch up with us. The exact opposite happened. And so this system that we're all part of, this new Democratic grassroots, is enormously powerful. This is a secret weapon we have. I mean, I did a long interview with Ron Brownstein yesterday about the election, and I talked to him about this for 15, 20 minutes because reporters don't know this. This is a new thing. It happened during COVID, right? This is, it's been building for years, but now it's hit a critical mass. We now have millions of proud patriots who love their country, taking actions to save their democracy. And folks, I just want you to know that I could see your work in the data every day in the final 7 days of the election in 2022. And it's why I think we have to really think, as we keep doing in all these places, right? We got to 59 in Colorado, 57 in Pennsylvania, 55 in Michigan, 54 in New Hampshire. We did really well in Wisconsin. This system that we've built is pushing our performance to the upper end of what's possible again and again and again. And it isn't by accident. It's not it is because people are doing the friggin' work, right? I mean, I talk about how hopium, my new phrase, is hope with a plan. I mean, we had hoped the election was going to go well in 2022, but we didn't sit back and just hope. We did the work. And we changed the outcome of the election through our collective work, the money we gave and all the work we did. And we're now going to hopefully join David in doing this in Ohio on August 8th. Or as you said, today and tomorrow, not on August 8th. The work we do today, tomorrow, and over this weekend is what will make August 8th a successful day. So thank you all very much. Let me go.
By the way, I feel
jump
too.
in.
I mean,
Yeah.
In this case, again, think about not to only go about Ohio for a second, but in a low voter turnout race, all that work is intensified even by more. That's what happened in Kansas. And so all these postcards and texts and phone calls, huge in a race where you expect a teen level turnout. And that's why that 65,000 number, and some people have already given through the link that Mary put up. I really appreciate that. A 65,000 unreturned number of ballots is a massive number in a low turnout election. So every single vote we get across that line, we know Ohioans are against this. And if we can get people voting in any level that represents how Ohioans feel on it, we win. So yeah, I feel it too. I mean, I hear it from everyone doing it. But the early Cuyahoga early vote turnout, to go back to your point about day one, was almost on par with the governor's race last year. That's how much people were showing up on day one. And that's been true in a lot of these counties. We're seeing now, I don't think it'll ultimately be the same, but for an August election to be even a week, the same trend line as a governor's race is enormous. And that's because of all the things that everyone here and in Ohio have been doing to make sure people see an election that our Secretary of State and the Republicans did not want them to even be paying attention to.
Yeah, it's really important. So listen, the question, mostly what's in the chat is just people comparing notes and how to be helpful to you and be helpful to Ohio, which is great. I mean, there are, we're getting some questions on day one, and, look, these things, I want everyone to realize these things are all workshopped, right? I mean, the reason that I've taken to Substack is that it's, Twitter used to be my sketch pad. And with Twitter being degraded and eventually is going to go away for all of us, I needed some other place to take all this stuff that's in our head and sort of put it out there as a sketch pad. I've come to really love Substack. And I appreciate everybody who's been part of the Hopium community. It's been so much fun, and it's a powerful tool. I mean, it's also just, it's graphics and everything else, the video, it's really well designed. I've really enjoyed it. And I think that part of it, I was just getting some comments about whether day one's the right language. Look, the whole way this stuff all works, even, the Biden economic message. I mean, whatever Biden's saying now, he's going to be saying something different 12 months from now about the economy. These things all evolve. We go out and test it. We say it, right? You get feedback, you get, stuff, and you keep workshopping it. But the critical thing is that this early vote, the emergence of the early vote for the Democratic Party is this enormous tactical thing that David and I would have dreamed about 20 years ago. in terms of being able to turn out Democrats. And we have to all really, as he pointed out, it's a change in mindset, right? The election's now taking place for weeks. And this is far better for us than for them. This is a hugely new, powerful opportunity we have, right? To get to 55, to push our performance through the roof. And I think that it's exciting. Anyway, David, let me just say closing comments on any other thoughts you have for everybody. And I think we've really made the case, I hope, to everyone watching about why we need to play in Ohio. Any final thoughts or anything you didn't cover today you want to get to?
Once you see the big picture, and this is where I do hope people read the book. Once you see the big picture, almost everything they do is predictable. It's all about state house power for them. And anything that threatens their state house power, like state Supreme Courts, that's why they did the Moore v. Harper case. That's a threat to state house power. Or citizens bringing referendum, that's a threat to state house power. So they want to curb that back. A local prosecutor in Georgia is a threat. A Democratic auditor in Iowa is a threat, so they're going to strip him of power. Governor Cooper, when he won in North Carolina, was a threat. They stripped him of power. So once you see that everything for them is about the state house, to go back to one of the points about how we have to keep fighting and not put things away after a federal election, once you see what their battle is, I think it's sobering, but it also is so clarifying about what we have to do. And what I love about what's building is, and when we do it, we are winning. Even in places we don't think we can. It's because we haven't been fighting the right battle in the right places in the right way. And so my hope is, as people see that, like, it all of a sudden becomes very clear and somewhat obvious what we need to do better. Don't shut down after November. Steve Bannon doesn't shut down. Simon, you didn't shut down for a second after you could have done a victory dance for months about last November. We all need to just keep going because it's a long battle for democracy. We need to go in places that we normally don't go in because democracy is being attacked, especially intensely, through uncontested districts in red states. That's what led to Dobbs. The woman who passed the Dobbs law, uncontested next year. The guy who passed the law that led the 10-year-old rape victim to go to Indiana in Ohio, uncontested next year. The Texas crazy law, uncontested. And that's their dream scenario. We pass crazy laws that turn the nation upside down, but we're not even challenged the next election. We've got to interrupt all of that. And the good news, again, is once we start doing that, as we've seen in recent years, especially the last year plus, we see ourselves winning in the very places where they have been kind of owning us. So I'm very optimistic if we see the battle plan. I look forward to, and I know that answers a few of the questions, but yeah, look forward to any other questions people have.
Yeah, and listen, subscribe to David's Substack, buy his book, right? Go to his website if you can, and get, if you can sign up there. Let's do this work in Ohio, commit to do a shift or two, in the next few days. Don't wait till the end of next week. We take people off, they vote, they come off the rolls, we keep moving to lower propensity voters. It's how we win. We just went through this. And I think, just to complete something David raised earlier as a way of ending, is that I think what's so important about the work we're doing in Hopium, the work that David's doing, is that we're not living in our fears. We're not living in anxiety. We're not letting the fear of our democracy slipping away paralyze us, right? This is all about what you can do about it. Because one of the things that I've learned is that my own fear, my own anxiety about what MAGA represents, that I just decided that I needed to do more. And so all that I was doing last cycle, and I got 100 million Twitter views in the final 3 weeks of the election. It was insane how many people I reached, right, with a hopeful message. But what I realized is that I wasn't doing enough, and I needed to create a new vehicle to allow me to do more, because I was worried and I wasn't sure that we were going to win and prevail. And I think that what's been so exhilarating this year is that this incredibly strong performance that we saw in the battlegrounds in 2022 has carried over to 2023. We are continuing to take real estate away from them. And I just published this week, one of the things that's important for everyone to know, and go, if you've seen it on my Substack, polls have started to move towards Biden, in Biden's direction this month. There's been a shift. First of all, we didn't have a lot of polling, right? So this month, there's been a lot of media, there's been a lot of independent polling, high quality, large sample polls. In the YouGov Economist poll, Biden has gone from being down 4 to up 2 in the last month, right? You're seeing now, he's now got about a 3 to 4 point lead, which is where the election was in 2020. And I just want everyone to think about this for a second. Trump got 47% of the vote in 2020. Do we think it's more likely that he gets to 45 or to 50? My view is that it's more likely he gets to 45. And that we can get up into the mid to high 50s as we did in these battleground states. There's no way that Donald Trump is going to pick up a whole lot of voters that didn't vote for him last time. And so Biden is already up 3 to 4 points in the race now, based on where things are. And it's early, right? I mean, remember, everything is soft and you can't read too much into this. But what is important about polling is when you see consistent movement or everything pointing in one direction or trends, right? The trend right now is that Biden is starting to open up a real lead. This really matters, right? I want to be up 3 to 4 points now, because then that makes it possible for us to get to 6, 7, 8, next year, and even up to 10. And so I want to close with this basic idea is that Joe Biden has been a good president. The country is better off. The Democratic Party is strong, and make sure you buy David's book. Okay, everybody. Thanks so much. Keep
Thanks,
working
everybody.
hard.
Thanks, Simon, for
Appreciate
having
your
me.
time today.